you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Information, I just need some information. I've been dying. Is it lack of education? I've been reading without any transformation. I'm addicted. Is it overstimulation? Hey.
Welcome to the Sixth Sense Report.
Our guests today are Joel Nikoloff and Darnell Samuels. They're the hosts of the Sixth Sense Report, a fantastic podcast that you all should check out. In this episode, we discuss lockdown, the purpose of the government, what are laws, what are rights, the common good. I hope you enjoy this episode. Please welcome Joel and Darnell to the Kazingram Dialogue. Hello, gentlemen. Thank you.
Good to be here.
Hey.
So we have the co-host of the Sixth Sense Report, Joel Nikoloff and Darnell Samuels. It's the first time that both of them are here on
together
the podcast at the same time. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for having us, IJ.
Yeah,
thanks.
So what are you guys thinking about the lockdown that we've been in for the past 3 months, 2.5 months, 3 months?
Well, that's not a deep question at all. I mean, there's honestly so many aspects of that question that you could talk about. I mean, I think primarily I'm frustrated with public discourse. Because it's become, team lockdown versus team whatever, liberals, Democrats versus team conservative, team Democrat or Republicans as being anti-lockdown. And there's no actual discourse as to, is it effective? Is this good? Is it bad? How do we even measure this? And so it's just the standard bipartisan bickering in our public discourse over an issue that, it doesn't need to be political. It doesn't need to be, two sides of the spectrum. If the goal is, actually for what's best for humanity or for cities or for whatever, way you want to look at it.
What about in Canada though? Because Canada is not as bipartisan as the United States.
Sorry. Say that again, IJ.
What about Canada? Because Canada, we have 4 parties. I mean, let's be honest, the Green Party and the NDP, they're not much, but they still exist. It's not as bipartisan down in the States compared to the States, right?
Yeah, but we don't take our politics too seriously, and we tend to divide ourselves up into the same partisan teams as the Americans do.
Yeah.
It's something that we've all talked about either as a group or one-on-one, and something that I keep going back and forth on is that now we are at the end of May. So lockdown started March, I think 15th or 18th or 17th, maybe March 17th was when it started.
Mm-hmm.
And now that we're at the end of May, Canadians specifically, we've gone through like 7 months of winter, staying indoors. And it's becoming more and more difficult, I think, for people to stay indoors at this time. And so what I struggle with is whether, staying safe, and it should ultimately come down to individual family limitations, or the local government, the local municipal putting together their own sort of restriction for people within their community, as opposed to, Justin Trudeau doing his daily Justin Trudeau show every morning, every afternoon. What do you guys think?
Why don't you go ahead, Joel?
I think, I would say from the beginning, I thought that there's way too much of a broad solution. Now, granted, when March 17th happened, let's say our high level of ignorance of everything that was going on, you could argue out of precaution because of our ignorance, a broad solution made sense. But I would say that clearly, let's use New York because it's a crazy example. New York City, the solution in the core should be totally different than rural New York. Now, obviously, there may be a concern about people transporting from one place to the other. Yes, but when especially like look at flyover states, look at different places, the population density is so different that, the number of people you come in contact is already drastically different. And so, we're talking about completely unique or not unique, but completely different places and contexts having the exact same solution. And I would argue that for most of the decisions that have been going on, it's one variable is the relevant factor, right? Like COVID deaths is the only thing we're concerned about. Now, obviously there was also hospital capacity, let's say, but I would argue is even number of deaths a relevant or the relevant metric. And I can hash that out in a little bit more, but I'll kind of, give Darnell an opportunity to give his 2 cents on what's good.
Oh, sorry, IJ, what was the question again?
What do you, in terms of being in May now, a few months in, what are your thoughts on that? Are you saying, okay, maybe it's time to open up the economy, let's go back, let's stop with this lockdown? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, like you said before, it was cold when we first got locked down, and now that it's warmed up, I think a lot of people are just anxious to, get back outside and be around people. Because I heard a lot of people using the term, a lot of people saying they're going stir crazy. A lot of concerns about people's mental health. And it's funny because, like, even for me, when I went to England in March, and so it was supposed to be a 2-week trip. I was 1 week in, and then Trudeau calls everybody home. So now I'm scrambling to come home. So I come home, and, I get to the airport, and they still tell me, okay, you're on quarantine for 2 weeks. And so I'm on quarantine for 2 weeks, and then my job tells me, okay, don't come in for another 2 weeks. And then, things are getting spaced out. And so now I didn't leave the house for like 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. I just, I'm just at home, just doing push-ups, not leaving the house. And eventually, I started playing with my mind, and I was like, oh, wow, this is probably what a lot of people are going through. But, it's just, you just got to roll with the punches and make the use of the best situation.
I think, the stir craziness is also a factor of, the statistics and way things are playing out, right? There's a lot of things that arguably were paternalistic from the government. Rather, it's like, oh, we want to control behavior rather than inform you to make your own decisions. Mm-hmm. Right. That's why I use the term paternalistic, because as a parent, with your 2-year-old, I'm not going to educate you on why you shouldn't climb the stairs. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be around you to protect you and control the behavior because you're not in a, and it's just this, I think there's always going to be idiots, right? Like you get a group of 100 people, 3 of them are going to be dumb. They're going to do something stupid. They're going to be, just, you can't control, like that's always a factor. But I think so often there's this, well, we have to worry about the idiots, so we treat everybody like an idiot.
Sorry. So who's the idiot?
Well, so, I'll use an extreme example of like, let's say this turned out to be like the Black Plague. Right. And so the concern being, hey, we don't know how severe this is. So rather than, the three people who are like, well, I don't really care about the black plague, like it doesn't matter, and they put other people at risk. So worrying about those people who are just like, oh, this is a mass conspiracy, it doesn't, the virus doesn't even exist, they're just trying to control us, so that's sort of a response. It's like, oh, because we're afraid of that small select group of people that are more than anything putting themselves and their immediate people at risk, because of that, we're treated like idiots. Or we're prevented from being idiots by locking us in.
Yeah, well, and then, so sorry to hijack the show, IJ. But,
you guys.
This brings us to the issue of liberty.
Yeah.
Right. and how we view it. Because as a historian, what I find fascinating about this is that we're living in history. Right? Like later on down the road, people are going to read about this moment in time, and we're going to be those old guys saying, yeah, man, I remember back in 2020, man, that was a crazy time. Right? That's going to be us. And one of the principles that, you're learning from this moment in time, of course, is one, using your time wisely, but also like really thinking through liberty and our freedom, and really wrestling with, okay, like, the reach of the government and what we're allowed to do, because we talk about, from a Christian perspective, civil disobedience, right? So Christians will say, okay, well, we got to obey the government because God created the government. And so we should, try our best to obey it unless they do something against our religion. But us exercising our liberty and freedom against what the government's telling us isn't civil disobedience. We're just exercising our rights, right? So if you look at the Charter, Section 2 of the Charter of Rights, it says, everyone has the following fundamental freedoms. A, freedom of conscience and religion. B, freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including the freedom of the press and other media and communication. And C, freedom of peaceful assembly. So right there, you see that we're not practicing civil disobedience, we're exercising constitutional rights, right? So we start to debate the idea of protection of life versus protection of livelihood. I still have to go outside and make a living for my family. I don't have the luxury of sitting at home, stay safe. That's not some people's reality.
And
what do you guys think on that?
That's the case with if you're a carpenter, if you're a plumber, if you're an electrician, if you're a construction worker,
any labor, right?
Any sort of labor, you can't be a work from home plumber. I mean, you could if you have a YouTube channel, but you can't be a work from home, electrician. And I think that, that Darnell, that's a very interesting point, because something that I don't think that it is there's an infringement. I think there is. I think to an extent, yes, we have civil liberties, but the government saying, "Hey, you should stay at home for the safety of everyone," and people abiding by that and taking that. I think there is a sense in which there's the common good. I mean, we live in a secular age, but there is it's that idea of the common good coming back in.
Yeah. But and I'm gonna throw alley-oop to Joel. I'm gonna throw him a lob pass. So, but and push back into what you're saying, IJ. That is that the government's job to protect our lives,
especially from ourselves to some extent. Right.
But again, it comes back to deeper questions of what is the role of the government? Is the role of the government to keep us safe or to protect us from ourselves?
Well, and I think, to some extent, that's why I think somewhere, I don't know if it was Canada or the US, I heard something about like essentially calling it a wartime emergency, right? For that sort of, because I think it was the US, there is different powers granted to the government if you're declaring war. And I think I heard something or saw something about, we're declaring war on the virus, and I think it's important to recognize that what are we talking about with regards to the risk, right? Because we're talking about, we're going to infringe on your liberties. And in Canada, I mean, we don't have the concept of inalienable rights, but in the US, you've seen a couple of states basically just, their Supreme Court have said, nope, the lockdown orders are illegal. Why? Because they violate the Constitution. They violate the concept of inalienable rights. Whereas in Canada...
Sorry, Joel, how would you define inalienable rights?
So, I mean, it's a bit of a constitutional paradigm or philosophy where the way the Constitution in the US is really written, it's acknowledging these rights pre-exist government, and the Constitution is limiting the government so that it doesn't violate those pre-existing rights. Not like in Canada, where the Constitution's actually granting those rights. And they actually say that we can evaluate, one right over another. And so, violating a religious freedom if it is the betterment for the common good.
Mm-hmm. Right. So is a right just the same thing as a freedom? It's you have a freedom to act in this certain way and the government can't interfere. It's just like another way of putting it. It's
I think in Canada, that's a fair way, but in the US.
And is it like, freedom as indeterminacy, you can do whatever, or, does it refer to specific ends? Like our rights meant to secure human ends, like ends of human flourishing?
So the way that I've heard it described, again, speaking more about inalienable rights, they're negative rights. They're not positive rights. So
Right.
They're not compelling, they're preventing, or they're protecting to some extent. So my right to my person and my property, right? So the government can't violate my property, right? But I think there is a conception of responsibility that does go with that, right? So if it's my property, now I'm responsible when I let someone on my property, right? So if my property is excessively dangerous and I've brought you onto that property, I have an aspect of responsibility. So if I have claymores or something, protecting people from walking on my property, but now I've brought you on my property and you die, there's an aspect that I have a responsibility there.
Right. And sorry. And I would also add just a sidebar to what Joel was saying, that like, even like a practical scenario, if I've been on quarantine for 2 weeks and IJ, you've been on quarantine for 2 weeks, so both of us are good. Why can't me and you meet up?
Why can't we hang
spar?
out? Right.
Why can't me and you meet up to spar?
Right. And that's something that I have been thinking about, is if you've been in quarantine for, the whole time and you haven't been sick, is it, why couldn't you still go out? Say I wanted to see Amos and you guys, let's say we've all been quarantined. We say, okay, guys, let's go to my cottage and we'll go hang out there. I don't think there would be anything wrong in that. But at the same time, the thing is, there are people who just have not taken the precautions. And in terms of rights, this is where it gets tricky, I think. And this is where I would agree with where Amos was trying to go with this, is it seems that rights, there's a difference between, your freedom and then freedom to do whatever you want to do. In America, they have the sense of like, I'm free and I can do whatever the hell I want to do. And then
I think the answer is property rights, and it's actually something that I've been thinking about and trying to tease out. But before I go there, I started to go there somewhere else, and I don't want to leave it just yet. Which was, what's the level of risk that we would deem that I can infringe on somebody's freedom, so I have to lock down, right? Because if it turns out, which I mean, basically the stats are kind of showing, outside of the super high risk, which even when you include the super high risk, we're talking about a death rate that's approximately double, maybe triple the flu at this point. I mean, the CDC's rate, when they excluded asymptomatic, they got it down to 0.4%. And
with the death rate, obviously there have been variables, but I've seen that at least with Jan Bar, who's a Israeli, I forget what I forget what he is. He's like a statistician. He has End Coronavirus. That's his organization. And they said after putting together all the available data, they got the death rate at 6.78.
Oh, are you talking about case? Okay, so here's the complexity of all of this, and I can hash a little bit more of that out too. So there's the case death rate, which I mean that what you're saying 6.7%, 6.8%. The only number that would pertain to is called the case death rate, which would be total deaths divided by total confirmed cases. Do you know what the case death rate of the flu is?
I don't know what the case death rate of the flu is.
10%.
How's it 10%?
So we're talking about confirmed cases over deaths that are confirmed to be for the flu. So the problem, I mean, it's not when this first started happening, that would be the best comparable, right? And so we had countries with 3.5 to 6% case death rate. And because we don't have anything else, the flu is probably the best, closest approximation. But what did they do? They didn't compare to the case death rate. They took the case death rate of corona and compared it to the total death rate, which would be deaths divided by confirmed cases plus estimated cases. And that's the 0.1% rate. So when you look in the news, they're comparing like 3.5 or 6%. This was early on. I mean, I got a report from Ben Swan. I can send it, share it to whoever wants to see it. But basically, they're comparing the 0.1% with the 3.5%.
Right. But see, this is one of the issues on the flip side is that, Joel is a numbers guy and he sees it. My mom is not. so Vigil already talked about the problem now for the average person who sees the numbers and can be misled or doesn't even have an idea of the concept of how population of numbers work. So you can already see the kind of confusion that that can happen with like information, right? Like people keep using the term we're in an infodemic. And so you're kind of like, well, that sounds great, Joel. But then there's other numbers that says this and there's other numbers that says that, right? So then.
Yeah, so that's where what I was referring to about the 0.4 was the rate the CDC put out as the estimated. So they're trying to account for some of the studies recently that have shown the number of undocumented cases are between 20 to 85 times.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And all I'm saying is that, again, like dealing with my family members, I don't know about your family members, but all that stuff is relative. All they know is that people are dying and they're wearing masks in their car.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. And then you start to see, fear really start to settle in. And that was one of the big things that I noticed when I came back to Canada was just fear in the air. How scared were people? People were scared to breathe the air outside of their home. Step outside the door. You go outside, you go, yeah. and you breathe the air. People are scared to breathe the air. Like that's crazy. Like that's paranoid,
Mm.
So, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, like, yeah, there is sort of a crisis of information where we really don't know. Well, most people don't really know what's going on, and there seems to be different numbers from every news site, and it's very politically biased. But I think that, like, yeah, maybe just like because the lockdown is coming to an end, it might be beneficial for us. Like, if the numbers were as bad as people were saying it is, like, what is the government's role in that? Is it to secure, the goods of individuals, or is it to secure their freedoms and their livelihoods?
Well, and I think the problem, and this is where I was trying to go with it, right? So I'm saying, okay, using that 0.4 rate, that's like 4 times as risky as the flu.
Yeah.
But the question becomes, at what level of risk does the government have the ability or right or justification to violate my freedoms?
But what freedom?
What is the purpose of government then? Because I think it's easy to, for a lot of people in sort of modern political theory to fall back into like Hobbesian assumptions and just think, the state of nature is for humans to be in a war with each other, and the role of the government is to sort of mitigate that conflict through social contracts and through different forms of legislation. And the government is to, limit our freedom in certain ways so that it doesn't become conflict. But its ultimate goal is to make sure that we can still act freely and in competition with one another.
Mm-hmm.
And is that actually the purpose of government, or is the purpose of government and law to make flourishing societies, societies which pursue, justice, truth, beauty, and the things that make human life worthwhile. And
Amos, you can't ask that question to Joel, man.
Okay, no,
you can.
Yeah.
No, you can. I know Darnell's. Well,
yeah.
no, because I mean, dude, my philosophy is like much more.
I've been hearing all week about how you're libertarian.
Libertarian doesn't even put a word on it.
Okay.
To be honest, I'm a hardcore sort of let's minimize government and continue to try to minimize government to the point of I think that we actually ignorantly don't question should government do this. Right.
Okay.
So to your point is what's the role of government? I mean, I think the answer for me and Darnell at least starts to go, okay, what's the Bible say? What's the biblical perspective of the role of government? The civil magistrate sort of concept, which, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm an expert on it in any regard, but, it's essential, for many people, it's like, okay, let me read Romans 13, and that's where it ends. And for those that don't know, for listener wise, Romans 13 is a little bit oversimplified. It's, submitting to the government that's above wherever you are. And I know, Darnell, that's a little oversimplification, but the reason I wanted to put it that way is because I think so often we forget to look at 1 Kings 8, which basically gives you sort of instead of treating God as your ultimate authority and your government, here are the consequences for asking man to be your leader. And we will, take you to war. We're going to take your money, right? Because there's an aspect of you're submitting to control of man who's sinful. So, I mean, to the question of, I would say what in today's society is a different question, right? So are you talking what's the theoretical versus what's the Canadian versus what's the US context?
And this is where I would differ with Joel. I would just simply say that with my idea of the role of government is that the government is there to wield the sword. Wield the sword for our good, right? Execute judgment. And then after that, when it comes to the politics of how Christians should approach it, it's more of an open fist issue than a closed fist issue.
Mm-hmm.
But
what do you mean by more of a closed versus open?
Sorry, I couldn't hear. Sorry, say it again, Ajay.
Okay, let me fix this mic. So is this better?
Yeah.
Is this better for everyone?
Yeah.
Or is this better?
No.
Do that again.
Hello.
Yeah.
This one's
a little cleaner. It's a little cleaner.
It's a little okay. So, what do you mean by open fist and closed fist?
Oh, right. So, for example, there isn't a Christian political party per se
in Canada.
No, just in general. Like there isn't any necessarily allegiance for Christians.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right. And just in regards to, of course, being obedient to the government. I would say paying your taxes. Joe would probably say,
don't pay your taxes.
No, I would say that paying your tax, like I'm Romans 13, wherever I live, what the government is, okay, there's an aspect of like, I'm under that authority.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't try to live outside of that authority.
And this is the thing with libertarian that I don't really agree with is the understanding of freedom is so completely out of whack with, if you're a Christian, it's completely out of whack with Christianity.
With the whole tradition.
Because Christianity, to be free, okay, so we're talking with Romans. St. Paul says, you're either a slave to sin or you're either a slave to Christ. You're a slave, right? There's that sense of you're either following Christ in being living virtuously as Christ has taught,
and his disciples, or you're a slave to your desires and your passions. Now, within a libertarian philosophical understanding, freedom is to do whatever the hell you want to do. It doesn't really matter.
Not.
Yes.
No.
Well,
That's a straw man.
Okay, hold on. Yeah, no. So I would say that if I can speak on behalf of Joel, again,
Speak.
it's not freedom to do anything crazy, right? Because you're not trying to harm anybody's property.
Do you know
you don't harm them, or you don't harm anything or anybody's property. And so there's still guidelines and principles that libertarian philosophy works within. But I think, like, in the context of dealing with Corona, like I felt like the heart of the issue was where libertarian ideas come up and everybody has to really start wrestling with it, is like, yeah, how far can the government go? And that's the good question. That's what we're arguing about, is like, what's the role of the government and the person's freedom, the government protecting the person's freedom to create for themselves, to make an income. So look, I'm wearing a hat from one of my buddy's restaurants, Heartbreak Chef.
Heartbreak Chef, shout out.
Yeah, shout out to Heartbreak Chef, right? And so he just recently opened a restaurant a month before Corona hit.
Ooh, wow.
Right? And so now it was a situation where now, the government's messing up his flow. Right. And for him to be able to, stay open and people to support his business, it's made it a lot more difficult. Right. Because some people need the income. Like, we're not thinking about how the government is, yes, it's protecting people from dying physically, but it's killing people occupationally, vocationally.
Yeah.
It's killing industry, right? So it's a trade-off. For some people, they're like, look, man, I can't afford to sit at home and collect this minimum wage you guys are giving me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a violation of that person's right to be able to be able to provide for their family.
Mm-hmm. Now, let me clarify in terms of freedom of libertarian. Now, I do understand you have more so negative rights. You can't harm someone. Right.
Mm-hmm.
There are that sense. But in terms of pursuing what you think will help you, you can pursue whatever you want to pursue.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That is libertarian freedom. Because libertarian freedom, I mean, philosophically, if you're talking philosophically, it's the ability to do X and to do Y, or to do Y.
Mm-hmm.
And so long as the X and the Y aren't, me involving hurting either one of you guys.
In libertarian thought, there's this principle of non-aggression principle that I wouldn't say it's 99%, or I wouldn't say it's 100% accepted, but it's pretty widely accepted. And really, it's basically, as long as I'm not aggressing against somebody else, there's nothing to restrict. There shouldn't be something to restrict my behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I would even say, I would say morally, I even question the idea of legislating morality. And the reason I say that is because when I have the concept of property rights,
mm-hmm.
I can't harm anyone. I can't harm a property. If that occurs, let's just say a sort of common law, tort law resolution. Now, I know our whole court systems are screwed up, so obviously I'm not expecting that to be done in, in the slow moving court systems that we have today. But the point being that as much as I have that freedom, there is still consequences for my behavior.
Yeah. Amos, you were going to say something. Jump in.
Well, yeah. So, I was just going to maybe expand on what IJ was trying to go on. Like, when we're talking about freedom, I think IJ wants to say that freedom involves a certain restraint. Like, it involves a certain amount of self-mastery. So, if you want to be free to play jazz music on the piano, you can't just go up there willy-nilly. It involves like practice, discipline, limiting your time to pursuing this art. All forms of freedom involve some kind of moral discipline. And I think you want to say that sort of moral discipline needs to exist at the state level if we're to achieve like the goods that political communities ought to achieve, right?
Yeah, and I think for me, a lot of times I find the conversations around, let's just say, actions of the state in general.
Yeah.
The pro arguments are generally around intention.
Okay.
But the counter arguments are about the ineffectiveness. And so the argument tends to be almost incompatible because you're not talking on the same page.
Right.
Right. Because if the intention of the regulation is great, but the effectiveness is the complete opposite, though, like, you can't even, like, you just end up arguing two things that are both true, but actually don't help resolve the issue.
Sure. Yeah. And like, I'd be much more of an advocate for like local politics and maybe a bit more decentralized power. Like the modern administrative state is not ideal at all.
Right. And I agree with that as well. But again, because the government has a stronghold on the media, their main media outlets like CBC, CP24 and so forth, it's just everybody's just getting that one perspective. Yeah. And a lot of people are hanging off of that. And now for guys like us and other independent news media, we know not to watch TV. We know elsewhere where to go to seek our information. But then again, because people are so confused with the numbers and seeing it as relative, like, it leaves room for conspiracy theories where people are jumping in and being like, okay, well,
Bill Gates is causing the virus.
Bill Gates is causing it, and then people are taking their economic assessment from rappers, right? And so it's just one of those things where we're like, okay, well, the government is sending us back out into the world not because things are getting better, but because we're running out of money, says Tory Lanez, right? So now people are like, oh yeah, Tory's pretty deep, he might be right. Right? No. So now people are like, okay, well, they jump onto the Tory Lanez train of COVID assessment.
If Bill Gates was really that good, you would expect that everyone would be having Zoom. You remember the Zoom music player?
Zune.
Microsoft? Zune, not Zoom. Sorry, Zune.
Yeah.
Oh, Zune, yeah.
Everyone would be using that if you use that. I mean, the conspiracy theories, I think the thing with conspiracy theories is that it is insane. It is just as insane to dismiss all conspiracy theories as it is to accept all conspiracy theories. From, if anything, the past few years has shown is that a ring of pedophiles, very strong pedophiles within the Hollywood and within, more elite social elites, that was a conspiracy theory up until, things started coming out with the man who never killed himself, Jeffrey Epstein. That was all a conspiracy up until that point. And so, to an extent, I'm not saying that people should believe in conspiracy theories, because I think most of these conspiracy theories are just like, are whack and out of tune. But it would be just as insane to dismiss all conspiracy theories as just idiotic and not give it a chance.
Yeah. Well, I think they point to a deeper problem as well. Like, a lot of news companies are more interested in selling product than actually getting at the truth and, making compromise with people.
I think your point is really well taken, because it creates the distrust in the public narrative. And so now I'm looking for an alternative, right? So it's like the example I gave you, where it's like, okay, we're comparing, a case death rate with an orange, you're comparing apples and orange. And as soon as you see it, you're like, well, I can't trust you. And so, because we don't have, let's say, the historical view of journalism where it was, let's present the facts, let's just find the data, the information, and give it to the public. We don't have any sort of independent, objective news that we can rely on, that we can go to and know that they're not, giving their perspective. And
they do. They can go to the Six Cents Report, sixcentsreport.com, and the 6 Cents makes change.
Six Sense has a very great, an excellent introduction with Denzel Washington, I believe he says.
Yeah.
I forget what the saying is. If you don't read the news, you aren't informed. If you read the news, misinformed.
Yeah.
And there's so much truth.
What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Yeah. But here's the thing, though. In terms of lockdown, now we're just going back to lockdown. There's a false dichotomy between thinking that the lockdown is costing our economy, and so we should open it up. But when in reality, it seems to be that had we left the economy open, because we still don't know how the coronavirus works, right? We know that it attacks the lungs, and when it's in your lungs, your antibodies can't enter your lungs. So we don't really know how it works, but it seems that if we didn't have the lockdown, the effect might have been worse. And historically, within human societies, very strong, short lockdowns have helped prevent major long-term disasters.
What is your, like, when you say that, the difficulty that I see is the only thing that I've understood that lockdown could potentially do is keep it within the community, right? So lockdown with regards to travel, if that's what you're referring to, I would say, okay, I know what you're talking about. But beyond that, we haven't even had the information to do lockdown. Like, we haven't had the information to communicate at this speed across the world. And so I'm not quite sure where you've seen the experience of lockdowns.
Well, okay. Well, actually, I want to ask Amos, what's your perspective on that? On just the lockdown in general. Were you for shutting down the economy or another approach?
Yeah, I was for it for the most part. Like, I think that, well, I'd probably disagree with both you and Joel and think that
what
the purpose of the government is to secure human goods, and there's some goods that are greater than economic goods, life. And so at first I was like, yeah, this is a good thing. This is what a civilized society ought to do. And as things have dragged on, I think there's maybe less reason to be locked down now. Cure research is a lot further ahead. There does seem to be a lot more like asymptomatic cases and people who've had it and who've recovered and just haven't even known they've had it. So the actual case rate and the actual death rate, it's very difficult to calculate. So I think maybe we should take a more local government approach. So I was sort of like based out of Kingston, and like, so a lot of people were coming up from Toronto, and people in Kingston were getting like really mad because there's hardly any cases in Kingston at all, and everyone's worried that, well, if people are traveling from Toronto, what are they doing? They're going to spread it. And I don't know exactly how you would make it so that people just stay put. Some people need to travel for their jobs, sure,
right.
Like truckers delivering food. But yeah, I know that at the Ontario-Quebec border in Ottawa, there was a police blockade for a while, right, Ajay?
Yeah.
So I wonder, if the solution would be to monitor all travel out of Toronto and see, is this essential? Is this delivering, food and goods and services to other parts of Ontario?
Yeah.
I think moving forward, maybe we should just do much more local lockdowns.
Okay, well, when you're talking about local lockdowns and a stronger local government, what do you mean specifically?
I mean, why, if 80% of the cases are in the Toronto area of Ontario, why does Thunder Bay need to be locked down?
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. I agree with that. I guess for me, what I would have liked to see was the option. I would have liked to see an option for people to stay home and those to go to work, right? So they, put everybody on notice. Look, we're in a potential pandemic, and so you are exceptioned. You could tell your boss, like, look, man, I'm not trying to catch corona. I'm not coming in. Yeah. And your boss won't penalize you.
Right.
right? And then for those there could be incentive for those who saying, okay, well, you know what? I still need to work. I'm not afraid of Corona, right? I'm not afraid of it. Like, I'm good. So then let me go and make a living for myself. But part of the problem is, the idea of risk aversion, right?
Yeah.
Where people are looking at death and they're looking at liberty. And those are the two principles we're going to argue about for the rest of history. Death and liberty. So because death is a lot, a more real thing to people. Liberty is just a theoretical idea to some people. There's like, who knows what it is anyways? But death is real to people. It's closer to people. So people will be like, okay, if we're going to trade off one, well, we're going to get rid of liberty and I'm going to hold on to
my life.
Mm-hmm.
See, and that's why I kept bringing back to the question of like, what's the appropriate level of risk, right? Like that makes a lockdown even because this is the thing that, there's no sort of objective standard. There's no guidance. There's no sort of protocol.
There has been lockdowns in history before, right? There's been in the medieval period, there was,
I think 16th century Florence was locked down for, was it Florence or Venice? That was locked down for 2 years.
2 years.
And they used to perform church services in the town square and people would watch from their balcony.
Yeah. But I would say to Joel, in response to what Joel was saying, there's no objective standard for what it is. I think that, all objectivity and truth goes out the window when fear kicks in. And so, we see people doing some absurd, crazy things, like buying up toilet paper, buying up hand sanitizer when this was first kicking off. Mm-hmm. And so with fear, people, they're not thinking clearly. And so part of it is what we see is statism, where people are submitted to the state. The state is their God. So when the state says, X. You're going to die or X, then people, submit to that. And it's easy to control people with fear. It's easy to just tell people, okay, look, do you want to die? Okay, well, no, of course you don't want to die. Okay, well then stay home.
I think that is the best way. There are, I think that if you study hypnosis, there are 4 things you can do: is instill fear, make someone very relaxed. I forget what the other 2 are, but fear is one of them, right? Because when you get someone to be afraid, immediately after that, you can tell them whatever, and they'll tend to. And now in Canada, we don't have such a strong, like Joel, and I know we Amos and I disagree with you guys on freedom, but in the United States, they have such a strong understanding of freedom that, and I truly love Americans. My brother's American. I truly love Americans just because of that, their tenacity. Whereas here,
we're socialists.
We have. I mean, here's the example. Here's the best example. Our health minister, Dr. Tam, she said, in the first month, masks don't do anything. Don't wear masks. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. She's stupid.
Okay.
So, and I've been wearing masks from the beginning, and I was like, this is stupid. Like, it seems kind of dumb that you would say this. And then a month and a half later, all of a sudden she changed her mind, and now everyone is wearing a mask because she said it. And that goes to your guys' point about statism. The government says X, and people think, mask, totally stupid. Only idiots wear it. And then the next day, actually, guys, we should all wear masks. And now everyone wears masks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and what's crazy, I was just going to say, what's crazy is you get the the Twitter or Facebook saying, whatever if you have an opinion that disagrees with the CDC or the WHO, we're going to take you down. Meanwhile, you could agree what they said before, but now you're disagreeing what they say now. They didn't agree with themselves, but you're going to censor me. That's
but this is where critical thinking, comes in, and being able to actually think through these things. And I think me being a Christian has helped me to think through things. So when someone came to me and said, you know what, Jesus died and rose from the grave, I'm like, people don't die and rise from the grave. Like, come on, man. You can't just go around saying things like that. Like, you have to prove that. You have to prove that Jesus Christ died and rose from the grave. You can't just run around saying that, and that there's going to be a God who's going to judge me at the end of my days.
Yeah.
Like, that's a bold statement. You can't say that unless you can prove it. Well, we know historically there's a lot of evidence that proves that Jesus Christ rose from the grave, and we can logically think through that, and that it actually did happen and it's actually possible. So when they say, okay, well, you know, Corona's going to do this to you, you don't really have to be a doctor to even think through these things. So I was telling a story on with our last interview about when I was going to England with my wife. And she you know, like 2 days before, she was like, you know what, Darnell, let's not go. And this was just when things were ramping up, right? And she was like, okay, let's not go. And so, you know, I said, okay, well, you know, I'm going. I told her, look, man, one, I paid for this. Two, I haven't seen my grandma. She has cancer. I got to see her, and I got to, you know, sort out things before, you know, she passes. So I'm going. So, you know, she ended up, okay, fine. The point is she was listening to a lot of, you know, family and friends, you know, saying, hey, look, it's getting scary. So anyways, so we go on the flight. And so when you're on the plane, like, it's like recycled air, right? So everybody has a mask on. Well, not everybody, but my wife has a mask on. I don't. And so, you know, she would take it off to drink. You know, it gets hot and muggy under there. She didn't have one of those nice Fendi ones with the little notch on the side where you can breathe through it. She didn't have any of the fancy ones. She just had the plain one, and it gets wet. It gets musky in there. She has to drink. Then she has to, you know, put it down to eat. And it was kind of like, you know, it just occurred to her. She's like, wait a minute. I could have just died right now. If Corona is in the air and I take my mask off to drink water, I can die. Right? Like the movie Final Destination. like you're
the
like
one wrong decision.
One wrong decision. Wrong decision. You know, you want to take a bite of your brownie and you're dead. You know what I mean? And you know, she just gave up at that point. She just said, okay, you know what? This is ridiculous. I have to eat. I have to drink. At some point, this has to come off. And maybe that might be God's divine appointed time for Corona to hit me then, and I'm dead. So it is what it is. I'm on vacation, right? I'm on vacation. I'm with my husband. I'm supposed to be having fun. I'm going to have fun. She got rid of the mask, didn't wear it. You know, she's still alive today. She's fine. But it was just a point for her to just think through. She's like, wait a minute. So if the mask is protecting me now, what happens if I take it off to drink water? Right. I mean, sometimes, you know, we just gotta think through these things. Right.
Yeah. But specifically about the mask, the mask is, even if the mask is a terrible mask, if we're talking terrible mask,
yeah,
you know, it still decreases the infection rate by 30%. You know, but
that's the thing, but I'm not infected.
No, I know, but I'm just saying, in terms of actually going out, you know, it is possible. Maybe nobody had it on the plane, but in terms of going out and seeing people that you, if I didn't know you guys, you know, and you're just walking around coughing, I'd be like, yo, I'm not going to walk next to these guys. I'm just going on. I'm coughing right now.
I mean, to be honest, I was looking at stuff today that basically was saying when you cough, the mask actually doesn't protect you. It's actually, like, if anything, the only time it would protect is when you're not coughing. Because the projectile, like both, I think it's even the N95 and the cotton ones. Sorry, N95 might be the level above.
Yeah.
But basically, the most masks that people are wearing, if they cough in the mask, Corona's coming through because the size of the molecule is actually smaller than the threshold that the mask actually protects.
But it decreases your chances of getting it by 30%, right?
Yeah,
and
it
you
does
times
filter a good bit of it out.
Well, but my point was, like, if someone's beside you coughing,
yeah,
it's not going to be, like, you know, so arguably, if you're following the social distancing, you know, and again, the other stuff's about, like, CDC says that basically at this point, we don't think it stays on, or it doesn't transmit on actual surfaces. And so my point is, like, more and more information is coming out that, like, I mean, you say 30%. Okay, let's assume that's right. But I think there's a particular context where that's right. And actually, you know, the thing that I would say is, how many people wear a mask and act really stupid?
Yeah, no,
right?
no,
Like
you're
the
right.
mask
You're right.
leads to like stupid behavior of like, oh, I'm going to touch my face more, or I wear the same pair of gloves for 5 hours and somehow that's pretending like that actually worked because I touched my face the whole time while I was wearing the gloves.
Right, but I would say, like, well, for the other aspect of it is, I don't know if I have a morbid mind, but like I'm not really afraid of death.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And like, I don't care, IJ, about the damn mask. If I die today, it's a wrap. It's okay. Like, it's whatever to me. It's whatever. Of course, use wisdom, move around, but I want to breathe my air. I'm not wearing a mask. Like, if I die, I die.
Yeah, but do you wear seatbelts?
Yeah, I wear a seatbelt.
But see, I would say, like, to that question, right? That's where I keep coming back to the risk perspective, because if the risk of dying from corona is a relatively low risk, like if we're getting to 0.4, 0.3%, the question becomes, how much more risky is that than jumping in my car? Because every time I get in my car, there's a risk I'm going to die or I'm going to kill someone else. And I actually think your car is probably the best comparison, because so many people try to say like, oh, it's not the same as doing this because that's only, like, they talk about like drinking or smoking or things that are detrimental to your health. And I've heard people try to make a comparison and they're kind of thrown at like, okay, that's not fair because you're just affecting yourself. But every time you step in the car, you could kill someone.
Right. Or even like, well, even having kids, right? And your kid, potentially something happening to your kid. So what, you don't want to have them? Like there's always something that can happen. But at the end of the day, my whole thing that I've been encouraging people to do is, live your life. I like to breathe fresh air. I don't like things over my mouth. So I'm not going to wear that. And my wife had to like correct me, or rebuke me, I should say, because I was kind of getting annoyed by all the masks and the gloves and the overhand sanitizing. Now, it reminds me of Romans 14, like those who can eat meat and those Christians who can't eat meat, right? Or meat offered to idols. And so, you have the stronger Christian and the weaker Christian kind of idea. So for me, I'm cool. I can go into the store without a mask, without gloves on and not flinch. I'm cool. But I shouldn't look down on people that wear masks and gloves and are afraid. I shouldn't do that as a Christian, or even, just as a principle for people.
Right. But I mean, connecting to a point earlier in the conversation, like, don't we, with our freedoms, we have duties, right? So don't we have a duty to, act for public interest? So,
public interest. Oh, I don't know about that, bro. You're talking to the wrong dude.
Okay.
Maybe ask Joel. Ask Joel about that.
Common good.
No, like on it, like,
yeah. So, I mean, like, if the masks help protect people, we have a duty to wear them, and you just shouldn't scare people anyway.
Honestly, like, and this is just all Corona stuff aside. Like, yo, man, I'm a pretty selfish person. Like I gotta come first, bro. Like, if I don't want to do it, I'm not gonna do it, and that's how my dad raised me. My dad always taught me, like, look, man, don't do anything you don't feel comfortable doing. I'm not a libertarian. For me, I just move the way I move. Like, if I don't feel comfortable doing it, I'm not going to do it. I'm not that kind of person that gives into peer pressure. That's just not my style. Since a little kid, this isn't even something I learned at Tyndale. This is just something I've always been, that kind of person.
But is it peer pressure or is it conscientiousness?
No, it's Darnellness. I do what I want.
Yeah. And see, my point is that, like, I think the common good argument, there's a place for that conversation, but I think the way it's being applied here is almost a false presentation, because it's not like everything we do has risk.
Yeah.
And so we're not like, if we were talking about like the Black Plague, or use an example of like 30% of people who get this disease are going to die. We're talking about something totally different.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And so that's why I keep coming back to the risk, because, like, okay, if we had, let's just, for argument's sake, restraint on government to if something has a death rate or a concern of like 5% or higher, now a lockdown becomes appropriate, right? But when something arguably is, I mean, right now we're approaching numbers that are relatively significant. I'm not going to deny that. But to be honest, I mean, there's at the same, the Imperial College model that in my opinion was really the big catalyst for the shutdowns. Oxford, literally at the exact same time, her name is the doctor, or one of the doctors on it, was Sunetra Gupta. And it's the Oxford model that they put out. They basically had an alternative model that was saying we're reaching arguably the peak of the pandemic. And the data is still supporting that model, whereas the models that we used for the shutdown were basically revised over and over. We went from 500,000 are going to die in the UK with the lockdown to 50, then to 20. And so my point is to say, there's arguments or modeling out there that demonstrate the risk wasn't really very high, but we only went with the worst case scenario as the justification. And I think, I mean, IJ, you mentioned earlier about there's a false dichotomy. And I think the biggest false dichotomy that's going on right now is like lockdown or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It's down or nothing.
Right? Like there's a spectrum of responses. And I would argue what I've seen really goes to everything up to what I've been calling the draconian measures, meaning the lockdown. And shutting down businesses, taking kids out of school. These are things that really we haven't done on a grand scheme with any sort of experience or data. There's an article by the American Institute of Economic Research that basically says it's called the 2006 Origins of the Lockdown Idea. It goes back to like George W. Bush basically read a book on the Spanish flu, and that kind of made him want to be concerned about this. And the point is that like most of these very like lockdown, as I've called them, draconian measures that I would argue are the new things we've been doing compared to the last 100 years. Those are things that are untested, and we don't have experience to know how effective they are. And so to me, the question becomes, what is and this is the economic mind. And I'd love to get into a little bit more of like economic theory and philosophy stuff with you guys before we step out of here. But I think the question becomes that, and I don't know that it's easy to answer this question, but what is the marginal impact of those lockdown measures? Because we can compare what North America would normally do, which is we don't really get to the mask level. But if you look at the Asian countries, they go to the masks real quick, right? When something like this is happening. That's why you look at Japan, they never lock down at all, right? Like Japan is like this crazy anomaly where they're an island. They have hundreds of thousands of, I think it's 100,000 cases, but they have 800 deaths, right? And so there's lots of data out there. And right now we're not in a place to really come to the conclusion, but the question of what was the marginal impact or what was the marginal benefit of locking down with respect to, let's say, health, and lives, but at what cost, right? So so this is where I think, what are the relevant metrics is a question that we're not having. And the best example of this is, I don't think you can just simply look at deaths. And part of the reason is because we have I think it's like 90% plus that are 60 and over. And for the most part, most of those have a life trajectory of like 6 to 24 months. And so we're preserving life of people who have a short lifespan to remaining. And that's not to diminish death. That's not at all. I'm not trying to say like, oh, we don't need to be concerned and we shouldn't, death is tragic. And anyone who suffered a death related to this, like it's tragic. And by no means am I trying to dismiss that as unimportant. But when you've got the UN putting out an article saying you're going to expect 200 to 300,000 kids in the in third world countries going to die of starvation. And so if we were saving the lives of 200 to 300,000 people at the cost that are life trajectory of 6 to 24 months at the cost of children, even if it, let's say it was 1-to-1, but if it's half to 1 or, 10 to 1 even, like, how do we make that evaluation? And to just purely use lives, I think, is ignorant of so much nuance and, depth to this conversation.
I think it comes down to just, so in terms of measures for how to deal with the coronavirus, because there's so much variables, in terms of how. So I mean, I'm taking, okay, let's take Sweden for example. Right, Sweden barely did anything. They're like, yo, it's okay. And then you have the neighboring country, Denmark. Sweden's, in fact, 66,000 plus are infected right now. Denmark is 11,000. Okay, and Sweden's cases keep going up. So is the right thing to do what Sweden has done, which we are looking at it, and I think it's good to compare and right to compare Sweden with Denmark because they're very close proximity. Their connectedness with the outside world is very similar. So in terms of what are the ways in which we can deal with this, it's not so much we don't have this mass experience of this universal lockdown that's happening, but it comes down to, okay, we still don't know how the coronavirus works. Right? We still don't know.
Yeah, we have a lot of ignorance transmission and number of
we
things,
still don't
right?
know. So isn't it wise to do a hardcore lockdown? Let's just say the lockdown ends this month, okay? But let's just say there was a timeline from March to May, and then we do a hardcore lockdown, get the infection rate down, then say, okay, we'll start opening up the economy, but these are the restrictions and these are the things that you should do when you open up this. So let's say wear masks. You have what Taiwan did, and Taiwan put, hand sanitizers at all the major businesses and schools, and they put those screens up for students and school. The kids were still going to school. So do something like that where we've seen countries doing this, so we could still do the same thing. And the other thing, before I forget, is Darnell's previous point about how he said he's Darnelly selfish. So here's the thing, though. I was thinking now,
Darnellism.
It seems very unchristian. It is unchristianly of you to say that and to act that way, right?
In what way?
To act selfishly.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so how would you marry your strong Christian belief and this, I suppose, a principle that you function with?
Mm-hmm. Right. So like I said before, if I was on quarantine for 2 weeks, right, and I'm moving about and I don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I have it, then yeah, I gotta put my mask on, but I don't have it. You see what I'm saying? I don't have it. So why are you telling me to put on a mask? Right? Because now, if you're telling me to put on a mask because you're showing me the numbers, well, what if I disagree with the numbers? Like out of conviction, like out of truth, like truth for truth. And out of conviction, I say, well, look, actually, I disagree with those numbers. Those numbers aren't this and that because I talked to Joel and Joel said it was this. Right? So out of my conviction for what I see as truth, if me and you are disagreeing, then great, we can graciously disagree. But I'm not going to tell you to do what I'm doing. So don't force me to do what you're doing. Right? I want your rights protected too. You have a right to put sanitizer and a mask on. Don't take away my right to not wear one.
But wouldn't you be putting your fellow citizens in danger?
But if they're wearing a mask,
they're wearing a mask, and I've been on quarantine for 2 weeks. The only person who's at risk of dying is me. Thank you. And thank you to the person who's trying to save my life. I appreciate it, but I'm cool.
Well, and at the very beginning, I mentioned property rights. So I do want to come back to that because I think there's a fundamental part here that does play a role. But Amos, you were going to say something. So
yeah, no, I was just going to would you be able to expand on your point about
Darnellism?
No. Joel, it sounded like you're doing like a cost benefit analysis, like, you know, the cost of protecting old people in the pandemic is too high, and so we should just act differently. And I'm just curious, like, how that sort of relates to Christian charity as well, because don't we have a duty to protect the vulnerable?
Well,
Yes.
but
Wait, Joel,
what cost?
Before you answer,
Sure.
this is a second part to Amos's question that is for you as well. Now, this cost benefit analysis, is that more so a cultural thing? So we're all in North America. We're a very nuclear oriented family. We go to Asia. Asia has a deep respect for the elderly. Asian countries in general, so they take deep care of their elders. You would never ever have an old. I mean, I'm sure there are, but in India, I'm specifically thinking of India. There's no old age home. Okay, my mom's old. She's going to come live with me. Maybe I hate my mom, but she's still going to live with me. I'm going to provide for my mom. Here, it's totally different. So the question is this concept that you're working with? Does this cultural aspect also play a role?
So, I mean, I think early on, Amos, I think you were referring to economics. The way you spoke about it was very like, oh, this is not an economic good and this is. And I would say fundamentally, that's a misunderstanding of economics, because to me, economics is everything. Like your time and how you choose to use your time is economics. Now, this is where I wanted to bring up philosophy, because in the school of thought that I follow, there's a book called Human Action. It's the study of praxeology, which is really the philosophy of human action.
Right.
And
that's fun, Mises.
Yeah. And so in when I'm talking about making the, economic cost benefit analysis, I'm thinking of health, wealth, lives, right? So there's for example, there's arguments or data out there that suggest that wearing a mask actually has negative consequences because you're preventing your immune system from being exposed to things. And so to wear a mask all of the time may have negative consequences. Right. And so the point is that every action has, like from economics perspective, there's this concept of opportunity cost.
Right. Hold on, Joel. But Joel, actually, can you expound, Joel, like on the elderly aspect? Because I missed that, what Amos was asking, because I think I lost that point. So what was the argument with the elderly?
Right. I was just trying, like, it sounded like Joel was saying, like, well, the cost to our economy and society is pretty great, and we need to sort of factor that in when we're protecting the lives of the elderly. And
wait, sorry, Amos. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, sorry, guys, because like I think I'm not too sure on what policies were put in place to protect the elderly.
Right. Oh, well, I'm trying to inquire about what Joel's asking, but basically, like the lockdown, part of that is to protect the elderly. Like I know my grandpa's in an old age home, and they've not let people in since like early March. No visits at all,
Okay. Well, I guess what I'm thinking in regards to like, freedom and the elderly, like they're more susceptible to die from it.
Yeah.
And so, of course, you definitely should tread carefully. So just like I said, like for me, who doesn't wear a mask and gloves, I would like to go visit my grandma, but if she doesn't want me to visit her, then I'm not going to visit her because I could put her at risk.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying? So that's where that when you said that, I was just like, oh, okay, wait a minute. I didn't realize, because most of the elderly aren't moving around. Mm-hmm. Sure. They're in their old folks' home. They're at home. And so it's one of those aspects for those people who interact with the elderly. They have to start taking precautions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I think to go to your question is, the reason I brought up the elderly being those are predominantly the high risk.
Yeah.
And so the lockdown is the measure. Now the question becomes, how effective is the lockdown at protecting the high risk? Mm-hmm. Right. So I spoke about elderly, but the question of how effective or what is the marginal benefit is the economic kind of term, of doing the lockdown, and what is the marginal cost of doing the lockdown. And so my point was, if the marginal cost is to save 100,000 elderly marginal benefit is that we're going to save 100,000 elderly lives. But the cost of the lockdown is going to be 100,000 children. I don't know. Like the problem is in economics, there's this idea of opportunity cost, right? So the opportunity cost of locking down is the 100 children's lives. But
this would be a false dichotomy, though, because even if you didn't lock down, the people, there would be potentially even more people who would be affected and die from. Now, obviously, I know that.
No, but that's why I'm trying to compare the marginal on both sides, right? Like, what is the marginal impact of one action in terms of the benefit, and what is the marginal cost, right? So I'm actually trying to say, if you took into consideration exactly what you've said, right? What was the net benefit of the action, and what was the net cost of and so that's why I use the term draconian measures. And really there's a spectrum of actions we could have taken. And when we get to the draconian lockdown stuff that arguably has the most cost, right? Because telling people to start working from home and making voluntary decisions to protect themselves obviously has a cost. But those costs are much less significant than locking down. And so when we start to try to evaluate for the next pandemic or the next scenario, we have to find that balance between actions that reap a benefit and the cost must be less than the benefit you're receiving. And so I'm not talking purely in dollars and we want to, we're losing this many trillions of dollars of wealth, but this is why I was saying about from an economics perspective, it is so much more comprehensive of the economic cost would include everything from, the spectrum of the people that are going to die because they have unemployment. And we know that unemployment causes a spike in suicides, right? So every single, when you do the lockdown, you're going to increase unemployment, which we know is going to increase suicides. So that's a cost of doing the lockdown. And those are directly lives for lives. And unfortunately, what I'm frustrated with is we just need to save COVID lives. And in economics, there's this concept or there's an essay, I think it's by Frederick Bastiat. It's called The Seen and the Unseen. And it goes back to the opportunity cost concept. So many times the benefit or the actual action chosen has seen consequences. But the thing you chose, the alternative, the opportunity cost, right? So in terms of a simple example of opportunity cost that I like to tell people, it's like, I can choose to record this podcast or I can choose to go hang out with my wife, right? The opportunity cost of sitting here with you guys is time with my wife. And, at some point in my life, if I spent too much time recording podcasts, the opportunity cost could be, put my family and marriage in jeopardy. Right. And so that's an economic decision. And so many people, when they hear of economics, they think of finances and wealth.
Graphs.
And graphs. Well, we use graphs because
I'm not taking a shot. I like graphs. I think answer Amos's question. I like graphs. I like graphs
in a second because I think the graphs actually relate to the philosophy side of it. But
answer Amos's question, man.
So the point I think that I'm really trying to make is that I think we oversimplify and go, how many lives are we saving? With no perception that there's a cost, and we don't even fully comprehend what that cost is.
Right.
So go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted, when we're talking about, what would have happened if we didn't lock down? That's sort of an unknown factor as well.
Yeah.
So we're sort of left in the dark.
Well,
and we need to make moral decisions to the best of our knowledge.
Well, and I think that's where things like Sweden, I think, get categorized incorrectly. Because a great example, I would say, if you took out the long-term care deaths, right? The deaths at long-term care facilities, because I would argue fundamentally those deaths shouldn't have happened if the lockdown actually worked.
Okay.
And my point is that the lockdown didn't work for the long-term care facilities because there was other problems that were unaddressed.
Right.
So the lockdown didn't make a difference for those people that died at long-term care facilities because of other systemic issues. So we almost have to pull that data out when we start to analyze, because that problem is unrelated. Or we need to do so in the future, if we address what caused it, the lockdown actually won't really relate to those numbers, right? Like a different decision is related to preventing all of those long-term care facility deaths. And so my point is, you look at Sweden and you go, hey, economically, with regards to the unemployment and the deaths that are related to unemployment, we know that they're in a much better position. Now, the other thing I think is really frustrating about Sweden is there's a false understanding of their objective. Calling their objective herd immunity, anyone who does that doesn't know what they were doing, because the people that I've listened to said herd immunity is a byproduct of their approach, not the approach. And so their approach is, I would argue, prior to this 2006 article that I referenced earlier, their approach is very much the historical approach, which is we know the way that the virus works is it passes through the population. And as it passes through the population, we obtain herd immunity and the virus dies off. And their objective was to, while it's passing through, we want to allow it to pass through the healthy people, meaning the children, because basically we know the numbers are astronomically low with children, and the rest of the population. If anything, anyone under 60 has a greater risk right now of dying from the flu.
Now, going to Sweden.
Sorry, the last thing was just that as it passes through, you want to protect the high risk. Mm-hmm. And once it's passed through, now the high risk don't have to worry about the general population spreading it to them. So that's kind of the Sweden perspective or approach. And I mean, they still did measures up to the draconian, right? Like they limited people up to, you couldn't have public gatherings over 50 people, right? So there's still measures that went into place, but we're told like Sweden did nothing. No, they just didn't go to the lockdown perspective.
So in terms of Sweden, this is the thing. We're looking at Sweden. I mean, we're looking at Sweden and we're thinking, oh yeah, the COVID functions as, a normal virus, but it doesn't, because it attacks the lungs, and your lungs cannot produce, your antibodies just don't go to your lungs. So what Sweden's doing, it just seems like it seems very irresponsible for them to do what they're doing right now.
Well, but based on what? Because like, if you look at them as like a per capita number, they have, now there's, as you said, there's countries right beside them that have numbers that are worse, but you look at other countries or other places and the per capitas are in line. And so the problem, and this is where economics inherently has a dilemma, because in economics, there's this principle of paribus, basically all things remaining constant, right? So if the only thing I changed was the lockdown, what would Sweden have looked like? Would it have looked like Norway? We don't really know. We can try to guess. And this is where, what I found really interesting, there were some stats about comparing numbers across states and trying to find a correlation between, rates and death and different things, comparing lockdown with non-lockdown. And they basically finding it's just a scatter plot. Like there really isn't a correlation, which if you don't have a correlation, you can't have causation. And so there hasn't really been a correlation between lockdowns actually producing better results in let's use the states as an example, where there's 50 different states and you've got a number of states that did lockdown, you got a number of states that didn't. And, and those that let down the lockdowns earlier and whatnot. And you've got people, shouting from the hilltops how people are just going to have mass graves because they didn't do lockdowns, but none of that came true. And
I mean, it did in New York.
no, but New York did a lockdown. I'm saying the places that didn't do a lockdown, right? But even New York is an interesting one because, you know, they were saying, oh, we need 100,000 ventilators. Meanwhile, the ventilators they didn't end up needing them. One, because we didn't really understand how to use a ventilator properly with COVID. That's a whole other sidebar of this.
Mm-hmm.
But they're now shipping those ventilators out, and so this is where, I think the political, you talk about more localized government, and I'm like, see, this is where I would say the libertarian argument gets misrepresented because I think the proper term that more represents the way I would argue and most libertarians would argue is voluntarism.
Voluntarism.
Yes.
That's how you would argue for libertarianism. You think that's...
No, I'm saying that what most libertarians hold to as an ideology more represents what you would think of when I say voluntarism. So you were talking about rules earlier and laws. Yeah, but I agreed to them voluntarily. Now, you talked about social contract, and I don't necessarily want to go down that road because I'm not a big fan of that line of reasoning. And I mean, if you want to, we could, but the voluntarism idea of, I move into a community and this community has a I think the best example of what I'm trying to say with regards to a community has a collective sort of arrangement. If you want to live here, here are the rules. But because I can move elsewhere and choose the rules, that as opposed to I don't have the ability to say, oh, I don't like the rules in Canada, let me just move somewhere else. Like that's not really giving me the option to select the rules that I'm, or voluntarily agree to the rules that I'm submitting myself to. And if I want to live in the middle of the woods, nobody bothers me. Nobody, arguably, if I'm self-sustaining, other than our, military protection, what is the government providing me with? And so, but we don't have that sort of ability to voluntarily kind of organize, and that's where I think, sort of that concept of localized government, absolutely, right? If the 5 city or towns in or the 10 towns in Mississauga all sort of had their own, differences and variations as to, what services and what different ways that we provide for each other. Now you have a community. Oh, you need education. You live in that community that provides education. It's not, I don't pay taxes to provide the guy in BC education. It's just the way we do things today is very much far removed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that is a big problem, but, when you're talking about voluntarism, we're born into communities. We don't choose to submit to those. And, those things are good and they offer us restraints, where, we grow up in these communities and the restraints teach us to become certain types of people. And, but
arguably you're not when you say about growing up, you're under your parents, so I would be under my parents' voluntary community, right? Arguably I could just turn up and leave and move or go to a different church and that becomes my community. So I would say, from a biblical standard, there's some stuff about the, prosperity gospel and preachers that are tickling your ears. The idea being that alone is the judgment of those people, right? They want to hear that preacher who tickles their ears. And so the idea though is that I'm accountable for the leadership that I put myself under. If I'm listening to bad preaching, I should know I got to get up and go.
Sure.
And so that's where I don't know how that when you say, the community stuff that you're brought up under has values, I don't disagree, but I don't know how that addresses or counters what I'm saying about voluntarism.
Well, I just don't think, most of our, we're thrown into the world. We don't agree to, and, the community, there's a limited amount of things that we can choose from. We can't just, our freedom to choose to associate with different communities isn't completely indeterminate. We have say we have 3 different choices we could make. I could live in BC, I could live in Toronto, wherever. Like there's a limited amount of communities with particular social narratives that I can choose from, and it's not just like completely free. And I'm informed with certain values and whatnot that determine my choices as well. So, like, if what you're saying by voluntarism is just like, I make choices to associate with certain groups based on the values that I was instilled with growing up, and what I was taught was good. Yeah, sure. Then that probably represents, reality as it is. But like, if you're talking about like, I'm an autonomous individual and I choose to be a part of the community, like social contract type stuff, I don't really believe that. I think like communities are natural things. The state of nature isn't just made up of autonomous individuals.
I think I would agree with Amos in that human beings are social creatures. There's no possible way in which you can live as an island.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, some people do. Like, you think about the randos that live in the middle of the woods and hunt their meat by themselves.
That's true. But those are exceptions to the case, right?
Well, and so your point is, we're social beings, and all of us have that in different regard. But my point about voluntarism is that from a moral perspective, the idea is if I'm not voluntarily agreeing to terms, then it's immoral. That's more of the libertarian position that I'm trying to say.
And so I don't see why it wouldn't be like, you being raised by parents is immoral.
Well, I mean, so the idea, I think you'd have to go to like, when do you as a person no longer have, like, do your parents no longer have responsibility for you? So like the idea of property rights goes back to responsibility. Well, we call it a social norm that, a child isn't responsible for themselves. And so because you don't have responsibility, you also don't have property rights to some extent. Like, so they're not choosing things voluntary, but as soon as they become responsible, now they make voluntary choices. Would kind of be the way that I would like. That's where I think the growing up argument doesn't fit, because, I would say, well, yeah, of course.
Right. So there's some point where you become a teenager, and that's sort of where at that point you become an autonomous individual, and you choose to become part of some sort of society. That's when you agree to the social contract.
Well, I mean,
the set of rules that govern the community.
Well, the idea being, if you so from a libertarian perspective, is that if you're not able to voluntarily choose, then it's moral. It's immoral. Right.
If you're not able to voluntarily choose an option, it is immoral. It's immoral. That situation is immoral.
Yes. That would more represent, I think that, like, again, I'm not trying to pretend like I'm like the best libertarian thought, but I think there's somewhat baggage with the word libertarian that sometimes there's an argument about like, okay, well, that's not what I mean. And so framing it as more around the idea of voluntarism, I think better encompasses what people who adhere to a libertarian perspective really are striving for, and demonstrate that, like, for example, forcing me to pay for medical care that I'm never going to use because I kind of go my own way, arguably is immoral. Right? So I would say the only time I use our medical system is for heroic medicine. I don't use it for ambulatory at all, because I think it's an epic failure, and that could be a whole nother conversation. But, if I break my arm or something, of course, that they're amazing at it, right? That heroic medicine category. Mm-hmm. But I don't have the ability to say, well, how do I tailor my healthcare to meet my needs? Well, I can't, because in Canada, I'm socialized medicine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why are only your needs relevant to whether or not there should be healthcare in a society?
Well, the question is, I think, better phrased as, who better than you can make decisions for you?
I thought, for social creatures, don't we make decisions together as communities?
Well, so I mean, I'm half stealing what IJ posted on Facebook today, but I use the same line, which is, I'm a socialist in my family, I'm a liberal in my community, I'm a conservative in my city, I'm a libertarian in my province, and I'm an anarchist in my country. And so we make social decisions for those that immediately impact each other. But I don't make a social decision for you because I don't know what's best for you. If anything, I could make a decision for you that actually turns out to be a harm.
Sure. But I mean, there's social level decisions that like communities make together, like to have healthcare, for example.
Well, but think about healthcare policies over the years, like lobotomy.
Yeah.
Like it's not a universal truth that those things actually work out.
No.
Well, on that note, gentlemen, we will be rounding it up. So for the Sixth Sense, where can people find both of you and the podcast? I know. Hit us.
Yeah.
So we've been on hiatus because it's tax season and I'm an accountant in my day job. And so it's just a crazy time of the year for me. But we're about to come back with our season 4. And you can find it at sixcentsreport.com, Sixth Sense Report on Facebook, on Twitter. You can find me on social media, TJoelN39. That's on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Okay.
Yeah, and you can find me, Darnell Samuels, on Facebook, and then Do Good to Darnell on Instagram and Twitter. So that's DOGUDDA_Darnell.
Okay. And is there a time for when your season 4 is going to be released?
Hopefully in the upcoming weeks.
Upcoming weeks.
Because
once we start, we just go every week, right? Okay. So there's an aspect of, we don't want to be having one episode in the bank and then be stressing.
And plus, we're going into season 4. And so there's a lot that Joel and I have to consider to create the best product we can. So just putting some thought into it and making sure that once we get started, it's like a 37, 40 episode season. And it's nonstop. So we want to make sure that once we hit the ground running, we're comfortable with the way we have it set up. But so please, to your listeners, check us out again.
Great.
We cover events. We just basically the Sixth Sense Report. We cover events that relate to Canadians, and we break it down from a theological, economic perspective.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for this.
No, thank you, Ajay. Thank you, Amos.
It was a good time.
No, it was really good. I thought everybody brought some unique philosophical perspective to the table. So it was really good, and I hope the listeners like it.
But you heard me? Does that make sense?